Are you tired of speculating on the implications of advanced AI in 1970s America? Do you feel trapped under the crushing weight of the Mimic's many secrets? Does the sight of this man make you want to set fire to an abandoned building? You may be experiencing modern FNAF burnout, but don't fear, there is a solution. Introducing Classic FNAF. That's right. For the low price of the sanity you parted with long ago, you can theorize about the original FNAF games, when the lore was just as convoluted, but there was objectively less of it. But act quickly, because your audience's attention span is decreasing fast. Hi, I'm nervous, and I love FNAF World. And while I completely understand why the fandom reacted poorly to it and Scott's subsequent embarrassment about it, I'm also disappointed that things shook out so unfavorably for the game. I think there is so much to this game that just gets tucked into the corners of the theorizing community, so while I find myself struggling to come to any sort of conclusions regarding modern FNAF, I figure it's a good time to go back to FNAF World and take a look. And rather than start on the surface and work my way down, I want to pull a reverse FNAF World and start at the deepest layer of this titillating tiramisu: Old Man Consequences. Now, there have been a handful of answers to the question, who is this guy? Most commonly referred to as an alligator, OMC has been theorized to be Henry, Michael Afton, and even Phone Guy. But I come to you humbly with what I believe to be the true answer to this question. And it's someone I'm sure none of you expected. And no, I'm not gonna say it's Edwin. But to make my case, we first need to look at what FNAF World as a whole is. The game Scott regrets making canon. This is important because it solidifies that the game is in fact canon, but if you've played this game or seen much of it at all, you know it's incredibly meta. There are references to Scott's other works that are integral to the story being told. Usually, such fourth wall breaks are reserved for his non-canon projects, so it's understandable that he's regretful that he put them in a game that does have connections to the larger story of Five Nights at Freddy's. I mean, players are lore hunting in a game where they can encounter the literal creator of the FNAF games, and he speaks to the player character as if he's speaking directly to the fans of the FNAF franchise. The game is simultaneously telling us about the lore in this fictional game world and commentating on Scott's history as a game developer and animator, his personal feelings and frustrations, even personifying his less popular games as bitter and jealous of the success of FNAF. Characters from his other games and animations show up all over the place in FNAF World. There should be some examples flashing across the screen right now from a video that was a big source of information for this video. Before FNAF, The Strange Beauty of Scott Cawthon's Other Games by creator Solar Sands. Honestly, all of the evidence we're presented with, including the fact that the world map of FNAF World looks like a literal human brain, makes me tempted to suggest that the only reason there's any FNAF lore in this game at all is because the whole thing takes place inside Scott's mind. So yeah, there are things we can learn about FNAF from the game, but not because it takes place in the world of FNAF, ironically enough. From here, you could argue that the game really is a portal between two worlds. Things that happen in Scott's mind affect the world of FNAF because he is the creator. He influences the story because he's the storyteller. Not that one. This reading would also call back to themes of many of his old games, where characters seem to become aware of their own creator. For example, The Desolate Hope is a game about multiple robots being tasked with creating their own idea of a simulated planet. And in The Fifth Paradox, well, let me just read you the game's plot synopsis. During a time of myths, monsters, and fantastic technology, an ancient tablet is discovered that makes a society rethink their place in the universe. When it is discovered that the purpose of their existence is to create the being that will someday create their world, a secret team of genetic scientists start creating super powerful beings. If they do not complete this task in time, existence will disappear, but problems start to arise as the Paradox Project produces genetically flawed monsters capable of terrible destruction. A lot of Cawthon's other projects explore these themes too, and I really implore you watch that Solar Sands video that I mentioned before in order to hear more about it. And here's the thing, if this was Scott's true intention for this game, to disseminate some FNAF lore in this bizarre multiverse environment that takes place entirely inside of his head, of course he'd regret making it canon, because that solution would be really difficult for the fans to accept, which is something that Scott has lamented about before regarding his story decisions. And for what it's worth, I myself am very attached to the idea that the game exists as a way for Charlie, aka the puppet, to help the spirit of the crying child pass on. And I think the game can be both things, but for the purposes of this video, I'm looking at it through this other lens, because I think at least on some level, it's clear that FNAF World isn't just FNAF World. It's an amalgamation of Scott's past projects. And if that's true, then why have we only ever considered Old Man Consequences to be a FNAF character? I mean, we have full-on boss battles with Chipper and Animdude, both which lead us to endings of the game. So what makes us so sure OMC isn't another instance of this? Especially considering the art style of the innermost layer of FNAF World reminds me a lot of Scott's 2014 title, Rage Quit. And I mean, the sprite from that game is just an angry version of Animdude, and I think it does favor OMC. But don't worry, I'm not suggesting that OMC is just angry Animdude. I mean, look at him. This is definitely not a human avatar. It's most commonly compared to a crocodile or an alligator. So really, the answer to this question should be obvious. That's right. Old Man Consequences is Doofus the Dinosaur, Scott's first ever game character. Now, I understand completely why our minds may not immediately jump to dinosaur when looking at this red fisherman, or even why one would dismiss it for a more accessible animal, but the two share a lot of similarities, including the way it seems Doofus is even using a fishing rod in the cover. From what I can see, he never actually fishes in the game, but there is a water level. And considering Doofus is from Scott's earliest game, and you find OMC in the deepest level of FNAF World as you traverse through more and more simplistic graphics, I don't think my claim is terribly outlandish. But you don't have to take my word for it, because I was not the only person who was hooked by this theory. So, Gibby, take it away.
Hi, I'm Gibby, and I'm here to derail this video and talk about Tom Bombadil. Lord of the Rings has a deep lore that you can find nestled in the middle of the action going on page, with more ineffable stories littered throughout the Silmarillion, but Tom Bombadil isn't one of them. Things like Gandalf being an angel or the history of where the elves come from are interesting tidbits for nerds that don't really impact the plot, but Tom Bombadil is different, because he's metatextual. Let me read you Tom's introduction from Fellowship of the Ring, and then I'll explain what that means. The part of Tom Bombadil will be played by Candy Bunny. So Merry and Pippin get in trouble in the forest. They're being swallowed up by this big tree, and Frodo and Sam run for help. Frodo's screaming, "Help, help!" And then this happens. Suddenly he stopped. There was an answer, or so he thought, but it seemed to come from behind him, away down the path further back in the forest. He turned round and listened, and soon there could be no doubt. Someone was singing a song. A deep, glad voice was singing carelessly and happily, but it was singing nonsense.
Hey, doll, merry doll, ring-a-dong-dillo, ring-a-dong, hop along, follow the willow, tum-bum, jolly tom, tom-bombadillo.
Half hopeful and half afraid of some new danger, Frodo and Sam now both stood still. Suddenly, out of a long string of nonsense words, or so they seemed, the voice rose up loud and clear and burst into this song.
Hey, come, merry doll, dairy doll, my darling, light goes the weather wind and the feathered starling.
And this continues for a while. There's a whole song that he sings. Frodo asks the singer, Tom Bombadil, for help freeing Merry and Pippin from the tree. He then invites them to stay at his home with his wife. They stay there for a few days, and he tells them ancient stories about the forest and the world. He's a weird guy who often breaks into song and talks nonsense. His wife tells the hobbits that he is master, like master of the forest, sort of. And then, on their final day, Frodo asks, "Who are you, master?"
Eldest, that's what I am. Mark my words, my friends. Tom was here before the river and the trees. Tom remembers the first raindrop and the first acorn. He made paths before the big people. He saw the little people arriving. He was here before the kings and the graves and the barrow wights. When the elves passed westward, Tom was already here, before the seas were bent. He knew the dark under the stars when it was fearless, before the Dark Lord came from outside.
So while I'm sure that Tom has some explanation deep within Lord of the Rings lore, the actual answer to what he is can't be found in the pages of the book, because he is metatextual, which means he's a reference to something outside of the text itself. Tom Bombadil is a character from bedtime stories Tolkien told his children. He's actually based on a doll that his second son owned. Tolkien wrote a poem about Tom when his children were very young, and published it in 1934. The poem is what we just heard.
Hey, doll, merry doll, ring-a-dong-dillo, ring-a-dong, hop along, follow the willow, Tom-bom, jolly Tom, Tom Bombadillo.
And so on, and it goes on to tell the story of how he met his wife in the forest. The Hobbit was first published in 1937, and Lord of the Rings in 1954, 20 years after Tolkien first wrote Tom Bombadil's poem. When Tom Bombadil tells Frodo that he was here before the river and trees, he doesn't mean that he's a primordial being. He means that, literally, he as a character in the real world existed before Middle-earth. Tom Bombadil as a character came long before any hobbits, elves, or acorns in Middle-earth. When he says, Tom was already here before the seas were bent, he means it. He was here first. He was one of Tolkien's characters first. If you've played FNAF World, you already know that Scott Cawthon is playing around with a similar concept. Chip from Chipper and Sons Lumber Co. is one of the main antagonists, his motivation being that he's jealous that FNAF took off and his game didn't.
It was supposed to be me. It was always supposed to be me.
Oh man, it's so meta, and you're so operatic.
A character from Scott's previous story is entering into the narrative to comment on the relationship between the two texts. When Nervous first floated the idea that Old Man Consequences might be Doofus, Scott's first ever video game character, I was immediately on board because the first thing I thought of was Tom Bombadil.
Doofus the dinosaur is just Old Man Consequences.
Oh.
Doofus was the first game ever created by Scott Cawthon other than Tess. I don't think I'm making this up anymore.
Please, for the
Doofus
love of God, we are not making Doofus Old Man Consequences theory.
Of course, Scott's first ever, oldest character would be the deepest in the code, in the simplest graphical style, now an old man, who's just so above whatever's going on in the narrative of Five Nights at Freddy's. To characters from outside the FNAF universe like Chipper and Doofus, these aren't real dead children and a real murderer. They're just characters in a story. So Doofus isn't going to go to the surface to fight off the evil spirits. He's going to just do what he does. He's going to fish. And in UCN, he's going to tell the vengeful spirit to rest their own soul, to let the story end, joining Doofus in the happily ever after that comes when a story's concluded. Old Man Consequences looks like Doofus, fishes like Doofus, and in Lord of the Rings, when the story's over, Gandalf thinks to himself that he'll pay Tom Bombadil a visit, now that his story is over too. I really think these similarities are intentional, and that even if Scott wasn't aware of the history of Lord of the Rings, he, as an author, as a creative person, was creating the same kind of metatextual connection and commentary on the nature of story that Tolkien created. Thanks for letting me on, Nervous. Sub to Gibby's Horror Homestead for more videos about FNAF that are actually tricking you into learning about literature. Okay, bye.
Thank you so much to Gibby and Candy Bunny for being willing to collab with me and for being unbelievably patient with me, as that portion of this video was completed back in July of this year. FNAF World, however you interpret it, is clearly Scott's way of looking back at his entire body of work. And because of that, I don't think the prevailing themes and details of those works should be ignored. The story of Doofus the dinosaur is simple but notable. Doofus is the ruler of the land of Denostria. A ruler, you say? And what does this ruler do? Well, he opens something called the Spazicore, a portal to another realm which houses a creature called Lord Grok, whose purpose is to disseminate evil to every universe, specifically their fair share of evil. And Doofus's goal was to remove all of the evil from Dynastria and send it back to Lord Grok, who you might refer to as a demon. I mean, look at him. And believe it or not, there is a later game of Cawthon's that was released in 2008 called Iffermoon, which takes place in a more futuristic Dynastria, or Kingdom of Dynast. Dynast? Whatever. It features this guy, King Doof. A king, you say? I mean, come on. And frankly, I could go deeper into the fact that this game also features a rather sinister mood and another character called K2, who is a robot with green eyes and an orange glowing light that was specifically built to mimic and replace King Doof. But I think I've made my point. Old Man Consequences is buried deep in Cawthon's mind, and the idea of him has been largely set aside so Cawthon can focus on newer projects. But he hasn't been forgotten. He's still there. He's seen it all. He knows the consequences of attempting to banish evil from a universe, and he urges us, whoever you believe this spare sprite to be, to rest our own soul. Leave the demon to his demons. Accept that there will always be some evil in the world, and take care of our own heart so that we do not become a part of it. I honestly find this to be the most poetic and satisfying solution to the identity of Old Man Consequences. I even believe it works well with later iterations of him if we use the logic of one more FNAF tuber, Clavis Key. I won't spoil everything that their Friendship Solves FNAF video has to offer, but they describe the Murray AI, and later M1's, storytelling functions as a sort of game of telephone, each iteration getting a little more estranged from the original. And what does Help Wanted 2 show us? OMC, just as a king, not quite the dinosaur king he once was, spouting off stitched together bits of dialogue that are difficult to decipher and whose origins have been long forgotten. Now, as long as I've thought about this theory, I'm really sold on it, but I want to know what you think. Is Old Man Consequences a reflection of Scott's earliest creation? Could his portal be the key to all of FNAF World's multiverse? And do you want to see me do a more extensive deep dive into how the themes of Scott's old games find themselves in the world of Five Nights at Freddy's? Let me know in the comments below, and while you're down there, consider hitting the like button if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe to become a part of the Nervous system. Thanks so much again to Gibby's Horror Homestead for collaborating with me on this, and to Candy Bunny for offering her voice to the project. You'll find their information in the description, so make sure to subscribe to them and comment Doofus is King on their most recent upload to let them know that Nervous sent you. That's all for today, so thank you so much for watching. I upload videos every week usually, and go live on Wednesdays and Fridays usually, but if you can't wait, there are videos on the screen right now just for you. Okay, bye! The game Scott Gothan, please! Someone make Scott Gothan real.